This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle Academy, where filmmakers and screenwriters go to learn from top Hollywood industry professionals. Learn more at ifhacademy.com. So in the 90s, I mean, obviously, there was a couple movies you made that really just changed my world. One of them being The Crow. And I was in film school when The Crow came out. I was literally in film school. It was 94, right? When The Crow came out, correct?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And I must have seen it in the theater a dozen times. I just kept going back every weekend and watching it again and again. And that amazing soundtrack. That was so good. That, in many ways, that was not one of the first, it actually was an early comic book adaptation. It was before Hollywood became comic book happy. It was after Batman. It was obviously after Superman, but it was, I think, the first
That's right.
indie comic adapted, correct?
I think so, yeah. Spawn was also around the same time. But,
right.
I can't remember whether it came before us or after us.
It was around there,
yeah. It was about the same time. But sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No. I mean, I was going to say, like, first of all, how did you get involved with that film? Because I mean, it wasn't definitely not a guarantee blockbuster by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess there was something in the story that caught your eye.
Yeah, look, I wasn't looking for a guaranteed blockbuster. I guess that was the part of the key. I got an agent in Hollywood, and this is like, the many years between making music videos with my friends in a one-room office and this, of course. And through that interim, I'd made a lot of music videos, became very successful making music videos for some big acts, and also started doing a lot of commercials as well. And I got involved with a company called Propaganda Films in LA that that got me out to LA, that produced a bunch of very well established directors now, whose names you would know. And I started making videos in LA, and through that I got agents at the time were very open to finding new talent from the fields of music video and commercials, and I nabbed an agent, which was CAA, which is one of the powerful, probably the most powerful one at that time. And, they started sending me out to producers and meeting producers. And I got offers of, films such as, and this is all on the strength of my commercials work, etc. I started getting offers of things like Nightmare on Elm Street number something, which I can't remember which number it was. I think it was 5 or 4 or something. And it's not really what I wanted to do. I mean, I've always had very specific, desires and tastes of what I wanted to do. And I love genre, but I like a particular kind of genre. I've never been a fan of plugging into franchises or sequels or remakes or anything like that. Because for me, the fun of it is building that world, creating that world. That's what I get off on, as we've cited 2001: A Space Odyssey transported me to another world. And so that's what I've always been hungry for, creating that world is what's so basically godlike and exciting in filmmaking. So plugging into someone's already existing world and characters and situations, I just can't get excited about it, I like stuff that comes out of my own imagination. So anyway, to cut a long story short, after I met all these producers, I spent like a month every day meeting producers where producers would ask you this basic question, which is always impossible to ask. And I'm sure they're asking it to this day of young filmmakers. They say, well, what sort of movies do you want to make? These are people who, haven't seen any of your movies or you haven't made any movies yet, And of course, my answer to that, as it still is to this day, is good movies, right? I don't want to limit myself to anything other than that, or excellent movies. That's what I want to make, because I like all genres. I like all kinds of stories if they're good, So eventually, after getting sick of answering that question for about a month, I walked into Ed Pressman's office, who was the producer of The Crow, and he was refreshingly unique. He's a pretty eccentric guy, and really stood out after meeting all these very, kind of Hollywood cigar chomping types, whatever they were. They weren't really cigar chomping, but that's kind of the way I.
Oh no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like that. Hey kid, all I need is a poster and a trailer, and I'll sell anything.
Yeah, exactly. You met those guys too, I see. So and he had this thing called The Crow. He gave me a script and he gave me the comic book, and I didn't particularly care for the script. It was already a draft, but I liked the comic. I thought the comic was really intriguing, and I really enjoyed artwork, and I loved the central concept, and because it was coming from a very unique, original place, and I was in no. Had no illusions about the fact that I was kind of reinterpreting the comic book genre, which it was already, as you've pointed out, established mainly through Tim Burton's Batman movies. They were the most recent offerings in that world up until that stage. So I went, well, this is kind of like Batman, but it's kind of like anti-Batman, right? It's even to the point of what he's wearing, the costume he's wearing, that long black leather trench coat. Brandon up with this idea because I kept saying to him, this guy's got to have something like a cape. I want him to have something that moves around because it's going to be really cool in action scenes. If he's moving around, the cape's going to be great, but obviously we don't want a cape because that's not the character, and we want a sort of like an urban version of that, a contemporary urban version of that. And we came up with sort of like full leather trench coat, which became a sort of iconic part of that genre ever, since that point on. But that's where it came from, and it was kind of like reinterpreting some of the Batman stuff, and just the city, it was like the city that it took place in was kind of like, a sort of a Gotham City, a noirish kind of Gothic city, but it was kind of just completely fucked up and sort of falling apart, and just everything's broken down, nothing's working, and people set it on fire now and again, which again made it for me a contemporary kind of concept, So that was kind of it. It was trying to ground the comic book genre and bring it into a contemporary, milieu, like a contemporary sort of feel, which was very much against the sort of like fantasy kind of over the top fantasy environments of something like Batman, and my reaction to that, and also, like I guess Richard Donner's Superman and all those Superman movies which were very kind of light and frothy and kind of, a little cheesy at times, So I wanted to very much completely go against that, and even Tim's movies were very, still had a tongue-in-cheek kind of. We can only do comic books with tongue-in-cheek kind of humor, because. Tim's not like this, but to a certain extent, it makes you feel like the filmmakers are not taking the medium seriously. So I wanted my movie to be like, serious. I wanted to. There's like drugs and stuff, and things that are kind of scary and dangerous and real world. So yeah, that was my response to what had gone before.
Yeah, and when you look at The Crow, which still is aged extremely well. I mean, extremely well. That I think you were right. I don't think the whole trench coat thing, which was so it became a thing in so many sci-fi world building kind of films. I think Equilibrium, was one of them, and obviously The Matrix. There wasn't a movie before then that had these kind of trench coats in a sci-fi environment that I can remember.
No.
It was in this gothic dark.
We based it on Carlito's Way, actually.
Yeah.
Because I'm a big 70s movie fan, right? And so actually we were looking at. I've done that. I also did that in iRobot with Will's wardrobe in iRobot. We were looking at 70s movies and how they dressed the characters in sort of like, hard-boiled crime type movies, So Pacino and Carlito's Way had a it wasn't full length. I mean, we came up with the full length because it was the cape thing, but I know for a fact that didn't exist as an idea in science fiction or fantasy, and it sure did exist afterwards. Matrix being the main one. but also Blade was also another one that had that same. Everyone was doing it. So.
Afterwards it was. But I think you were right. I think The Crow was the first, and you were the first really dark, because I mean Batman had Batman 1 and Returns had a dark comic book feel, but you're right, that tongue in cheek was still there. But you were the first to really come up with a comic book adaptation that was dark. I mean, that's a dark film. A dark hero. The heroes.
Batman was dark light.
Yeah,
Batman was dark light, and The Crow was dark. So
right, exactly. And I think Nolan's Batman was much more in the realm of The Crow, meaning that it's because Dark Knight, it's a fairly dark, film as well.
Oh yeah, Chris has been very influenced by. I think Chris has told me he was been very influenced by both The Crow and Dark City. I mean, the Batman, Chris's Batman movies, and it's partly because David Goyer, who wasn't involved on The Crow, there's a weird, convoluted relationship there. David Goyer, who co-wrote Dark City with me, was involved with writing the Batman movies for Chris, and he was involved with writing The Crow 2. So he'd studied the original Crow, very intensely in order to write the script for the second Crow movie. And so, I was very amused to see literally lines of dialogue pop up in the Batman movies, in Chris's Batman movies, the verbatim, out of the original Crow, not out of David's Crow, out of my Crow, So that's funny, really. And yeah, Chris is, I was working with Chris I wasn't really working with him, but we were developing something together for a short time. They didn't work out, and he was, going on about how influential Dark City was in particular to what he's done over the years, very successfully. Much more successfully than myself.
Chris is doing okay. He's doing just fine.
He's doing all right.
He's doing all right. Now, I remember buying the book, The White Art. I think it was the Art of book or the movie book of The Crow, and flipping through it, and there was this character in it that's not in the movie, which is the Skull Cowboy.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the legend of the Skull Cowboy and why it never made it? Because I know you shot footage of it, so why never it made it to the final movie? Yeah,
we shot him. Michael Berryman went through an incredible, elaborate makeup to portray this character. At the end of the day, I mean, obviously due to the tragedy on The Crow, there was a lot of stuff we didn't get to shoot. And when we went back to Wilmington to finish the movie, I had to kind of rewrite and restructure things in order to shoot the linking stuff, obviously without Brandon, to make it work somehow without him, and digital tech, a lot's been made out of the digital technology that we use to make it work, but it was very early days for that stuff.
Oh, I remember.
It was very very, very little stuff you could do, you get away with it. I mean, it really ended up being, take Brandon out of one scene, rotoscope him out and put him into another. That's really the extent of the digital, expertise that we could bring to bear, So yeah, the Skull Cowboy partly, though we'd shot the scenes with Brandon, I think one of the scenes, there was another one that we hadn't actually filmed. It was just, how can I put this? It just didn't seem to play in the story. It seemed like the story worked fine without him, and because he was used less than we originally intended, and he needed a lot of VFX work to help him be more convincing than he was in the photography. I just, every time he'd pop up in the film when I was watching the edit, it felt like another movie. It just felt like something that was not the grounded kind of storytelling that I was trying to achieve. And so, yeah, we had to excise him. And, sadly, we just removed him and we looked at the edit, and it seemed like the film didn't really suffer. Because his role was really kind of like an expositional one,
Right.
where he would appear and tell Eric Draven the rules of what was to happen. And there was the important scene that I thought we couldn't live with is the moment when Eric is about to walk into the church at the end of the movie to save Sarah, the young girl, and the Skull Cowboy appeared on the steps and said, if you work for the living, you're here to work for the dead. If you work for the living, you will be vulnerable. You will lose your powers. But it seemed like, the audience felt that the crow itself was the source of Eric's power. And so when they shot the crow in the church, it felt like that was the moment when he lost his power. And then, and it was such a simple way of doing it rather than having a whole other character appear and tell us the rule book at that point in time.
Sometimes it's difficult to let go of those babies that are beautiful on their own, like the Skull Cowboy by itself as a character might be, but it might not work in the whole story. And that's where the big boy pants come on, and you got to go, oh, that's got to go, even though we love it.
Exactly. It's a hard call to make. Usually, always is a hard call to make. But it's that story where you make a different movie. One movie when you write it, and you make another movie when you shoot it, and you make another movie in edit, and you have to try. Objectivity for a director is the most important thing, and the tool that you lose most easily and most quickly as you get stressed and tired and you struggle to make it all work through the production. It's very hard to retain that objectivity, but you've got to try and keep that, because you need to be the audience as well as the filmmaker, and you need to be able to step back and go, is this really working? And if it's not, as you say, it needs to be, when in doubt, cut it out.